Look at this, okay, so here's a trail, and the trail goes up over here, and then it takes a right angle turn.
There are rocks in the Death Valley desert that move across the ground on their own, leaving behind bizarrely long tracks. And for a century, nobody could figure out why.
So look at the size of that puppy. And it turns out no sweat to move every single rock out here. We're talking many, many bulldozer strength worth of force.
So what force has been making rocks move for over 100 years when humans aren't looking? The first recorded account of the trails was in 1915 when a prospector named Joseph Crook, who was supposed to be out searching for precious metals, found the rock trails. Crook reportedly showed the rocks to his wife, who couldn't believe that the larger rocks would move naturally. So she skeptically marked the position of a big rock, and of course, it eventually moved away from the mark. The lake bed came to be known as the racetrack playa, and the stones, the sailing stones. You go to the desert and you see the tracks these giant rocks have left behind, some that are parallel where the rocks have moved at the same time, and then they've turned at the same time, and you're like, what is going on? So I started looking into it, and what I found was a heartwarming story about two cousins who solved the mystery together, and a clever experiment that had convinced scientists that the correct solution was wrong. And then this moment where scientists all over the world were reaching out saying, oh, I have this other mystery with rocks moving. And a young scientist whose life was changed by this mystery. So back in 2014, cousins Dr. Richard Norris and James Norris solved the rock mystery at the racetrack playa. And now they're back. So I spent 16 hours traveling out to meet them and join in on their latest adventure. Check your spare tire, sharp rocks ahead, no AAA. Ah! It's vibrating my butt. Hey Diana. Hey, I'm Diana. You're watching Physics Girl. I think it's also worth taking a minute to appreciate how incredible the setting is for these rocks. Death Valley is in the northern Mojave Desert, sitting in the rain shadow of the Sierras. Death Valley is one of the driest places on the planet, and it is certifiably the hottest. So naturally, we went there in the winter. When we went, we camped out for a night in Stovepipe Wells, which is a nice midway point because it has a gas station and a general store that once served 12 pots of coffee an hour. And then we took a four-wheel drive Jeep and then trekked the 24 miles down a bumpy dirt road. And you sit there clenching, hoping you don't pop a tire. All up until you see the playa. Everything is so uniform, and then boom, track. So cool.
This is the lowest point over here. And you go up to the grandstand, which is a pile of rocks at the far end.
Okay, that's what the grandstand
Called the
is.
grandstand.
The lake bed of the racetrack is filled with dried sediment that extends 1,000 feet down into the ground. So one of my first thoughts was whether the tracks were caused by an animal, but then you see this place. Really, what lives in Death Valley? It's called Death Valley. There can't be much.
Well, we had a beautiful kangaroo rat in our camp last
Oh,
night.
cute.
And they're the cutest little thing.
They're cute, but they're not pushing around rocks that weigh as much as refrigerators. Richard had heard about the racetrack problem many years prior in school, and eventually the itch of the mystery got to him enough.
Well, so what happened fundamentally is that Jim said, I think we could probably solve this little problem.
So they began coming out to the racetrack and trying out experiments.
Jim had the idea of putting the GPSs on the rocks. We set out our own rocks, of course, drilled holes in the rocks to put a GPS tracker in. The switch would be thrown and the GPS would turn on to live, collecting data constantly.
Well, you would know the rocks had moved, but how would you know what had happened?
And then connecting that with a weather station meant that we would know what the weather conditions were.
So the duo set out their trackers in the winter of 2011, and their collaborator, Ralph Lorenz, reportedly claimed this would be the most boring experiment ever, as they prepared to wait for something to happen, knowing that it might take decades. But a mere 2 years later, the motion-activated GPS trackers switched on a day when they least expected movement. Before we find out why the GPS trackers switched on,